The guns have gone silent along the India-Pakistan line of control. After the most intense exchanges in decades between the nuclear-armed neighbors, a ceasefire is in place. But will it hold? And what lessons can be learned from this conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Cyril Vanier. Feelings of relief and hope in India and Pakistan. The latest flare-up in hostilities that killed 60 people across the two countries has come to a dramatic halt after 4 days. Nearly 30 countries, including the United States, are reported to have been involved in getting the ceasefire agreed. The Trump administration that announced the truce has proposed a new round of talks at a neutral venue to try and end the bitter South Asian rivalry. A dispute over divided Kashmir, India's accusation that Pakistan is backing terrorist attacks inside its territory, and differences over the sharing of river water have all been festering for decades. So, are both sides at last ready to negotiate? And what can be learned from this latest conflict? We'll discuss these and many other issues with our guests. But first, though, Hamza Mohammed has this report.
Calm on the streets of Kashmir after weeks of rising tensions and cross-border shelling. For civilians here, the ceasefire brings immediate relief and a chance to comprehend their losses.
Right now I have no clothes, no food, nothing to offer my children. They're sitting in misery, homeless and deprived. But my spirit remains strong.
They've destroyed my house, which I built over 28 years with my savings. There's no alternative arrangement for my children. They've completely wiped out my life savings.
India and Pakistan announced a ceasefire on Saturday. Both sides have since accused each other of violating the truce. Dozens of people have been killed in cross-border attacks since the start of the escalation. International pressure had been building on New Delhi and Islamabad to agree to a truce. President Donald Trump said the US helped broker the deal.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio has played a key role in the mediation, but so have some other countries like the Saudis. So lots of countries wanted the conflict to end, and they'll be pleased about that. The other big thing is Russia, China, and mainly Europe arm both sides. And so both sides want to see how their different weapons performed.
Both nations are also under domestic political pressure and the lingering impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. But for now, both Indian and Pakistani flags still fly over a divided Kashmir in an easy calm that many hope will last. Hamza Mohammed, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
And let's bring in our guest today in London, Walter Ladwig, a senior lecturer in international relations at King's College London, specializing in South Asian security, irregular warfare, and the geopolitics of the Indo-Pacific region. In Paris, Elijah Magnier, a military and political analyst. And from London, Shashank Joshi, defense editor of The Economist newspaper. A warm welcome to you all. Walter, let's start with you. The ceasefire appeared, and tell me if you feel differently, appeared to come out of nowhere. There was escalation, retaliation after retaliation, and it looks like we were just heading for continued escalation between India and Pakistan. And all of a sudden, Donald Trump writes on his social media, there's a ceasefire everybody has agreed to. Were you surprised by this?
I was certainly caught off guard. I mean, there were certainly reports that we were getting that various foreign ministries, as mentioned in your intro, were on the phones and trying to work both sides. And I know in coming days, we'll get more information as to sort of the specific events that led to the breakthrough. But it does appear that in some cases, the pace of airstrikes and in particular, airstrikes close to nuclear command assets in Pakistan may have played a role in sort of convincing major powers that this has gotten far too out of control.
Elijah, were India and Pakistan, in your sense, and Walter pointed out that we'll get more information in the coming days, but in your sense of where things stand right now, were they responding to foreign pressure, whether it's the US or other pressure, or did they just both seize an off-ramp that was given to them in order to put an end to this particular round of fighting?
I think it was very convenient for both sides to de-escalate and find a third party who would take upon his responsibility, although it was a collective effort of more than 30 countries involved in the de-escalation and the mediation. So for both to de-escalate, because the dispute over Kashmir is endless. It goes since 1948 and it has not stopped and it will not stop. So this big escalation for the first time and the test of weapons on both sides went to an unprecedented escalation that it was necessary to de-escalate and find a superpower that's saying to everybody, calm down. And then it is really the merit of the superpower who put pressure on both countries. So both have saved their face.
Unprecedented escalation, you say. Shashank, I want to take this to you. As the dust just begins to settle on this round of fighting between India and Pakistan, from a military standpoint, what did you learn?
Well, I think lots of things, because we have not seen missile strikes or any kind of strikes against major military bases and cities in either India or Pakistan for over 50 years. The last time was the 1971 Indo-Pakistan war over what would become Bangladesh. Even in the Kargil conflict of 1999, which was a very serious conflict over part of Kashmir, where there was nuclear signaling by Pakistan, we still didn't see those kinds of attacks. So the level of escalation is unprecedented in the modern era. I think the other interesting phenomenon for me is the very extensive and intensive use of what we sometimes have heard called loitering munitions, but these are essentially strike drones, suicide drones, one-way attack munitions that were used in very sizable amounts all along the line of control that divides disputed territory in Kashmir and the international border. And the interesting thing about these weapons is that they sit in the ladder of what you might call escalatory options. They sit above artillery, but they sit below cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. And the use of these drones, I think, was a novel and interesting feature of this conflict that really contributed to the sense of continuous crisis over the past 3 days.
India responded, and you brought this up, to the Pahalgam terror attack of last month with a really high-intensity, high-velocity, and highly publicized large-scale air assault on targets in both in Pakistan and in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. I understand, and I'm not a military expert, that is not how they have responded mostly to previous attacks in India. What does that tell you?
Well, in 2008, during the Mumbai attacks, the Indian government carefully considered whether it should respond militarily, and it decided against it, although many in the country have long looked at a country like Israel and said, we would like to be more like that. We would like to use military options abroad to respond for counterterrorism purposes. In 2016, after a terrorist attack at a place called Uri, the Indians conducted special forces raids over the line of control, but those were quite shallow raids. In 2019, they conducted an airstrike, but the airstrike was at one site, and that site, although it was beyond Kashmir, it was only just beyond Kashmir. It was in a place called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, or KP. This crisis is different for a host of reasons, some of which we've talked about, but the critical difference is the number of sites, 9 different facilities, 9 different sites, and some of those were not just a little bit over the border, they were in Punjab province, which is the very heart of Pakistan's it's sort of Pakistan's economic, cultural, military heartland. So the symbolic nature of these strikes was also much more distinct from previous rounds of escalation.
Yeah, they hit pretty deep into Pakistani territory, as you're explaining. Walter, this point that Shashank just made, that India actually applied a somewhat different military philosophy. Is the message here, are they trying to send a message to Pakistan saying if we are attacked in any way, shape, or form, whether it's India or Indian-administered Kashmir, we will respond with something close to I don't know if overwhelming is the word, but we will respond with a very high level of force. Is that the message?
Absolutely. And so this evolution in terms of the military tools being used and the locations is also accompanied by a evolution in sort of the politics or the policy. So in times past, the Indian governments would sort of view it as incumbent upon themselves to assemble evidence and a dossier that would sort of demonstrate, beyond a reasonable doubt or to something approaching a courtroom standard of complicity between the Pakistani intelligence services or military or elements of the state in terms of justifying then a response against Pakistan. And we've seen that desire or self-belief that Delhi had to provide this level of evidence decline in each of those episodes Shashank talked about. So from 2016 to 2019 to today, where the message that Delhi seems to be sending is that simply failing to act against groups carrying out terrorist attacks in Indian Kashmir or potentially India proper, failure to rein those in, giving space is enough of a provocation for India to be justified in responding, that they no longer need to sort of demonstrate that there are fingerprints of Pakistani intelligence all over this. If you don't stop these things from having space to operate, then we'll take it upon ourselves to see a legitimate retaliation.
Walter, this sounds like such a crucial point to me because India says that Pakistan is behind the attack that took place in Pahalgam and killed 26 people in April. Pakistan says we've got nothing to do with this. You say, meaning India says it's the Lashkar-e-Taiba, but the Lashkar-e-Taiba, LET, is extinct as a group. That's what Pakistani authorities say. So no Pakistani group was involved in this, and certainly the state of Pakistan is not involved in this. So why are you even attacking us? I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that's what pretty much Pakistan's response to India. And you're saying India is now sending a different message, that you Pakistan cannot use this defense to hope to avoid an Indian military retaliation.
Absolutely. So effectively, what was seen in the past as sort of plausible deniability, that there was not necessarily a smoking gun connecting agents of the Pakistani state to these various groups. The Modi government is sending a message effectively saying we're no longer going to play that game. We're no longer going to entertain this option that might allow duplicity on the part of the Pakistani government, who, to their credit, have in every single instance said, show us evidence, and we'll act. Whether what can be obtained through intelligence sources would ever rise to sort of a sufficient level to be convincing is unclear and perhaps unknown. But I think we're now at a point where Indian governments don't feel they need to engage with that at all.
Okay. And for our viewers, Pakistan says there's no evidence that we're involved, and India says it has evidence but hasn't presented it publicly. And India's message is, well, we've shown in previous attacks evidence that Pakistan was involved, and Pakistan hasn't engaged in good faith with that. So it seems that they're no longer holding themselves, which sort of ties in with your point, holding themselves to that accountability of providing that evidence, at least in a public sphere. Elijah, Pakistan says that it shot down 5 Indian jets, something which India has neither confirmed nor denied. How do you read that?
Well, even the French did not really confirm or deny the number of jets down, because we're talking about Rafael, and it is quite embarrassing for the French and for the Indian, who just a month ago put a purchase of the new French jet to include in their Air Force. So there is a confirmation from France about at least one jet, but there aren't confirmation about all the other jets, but neither a denial, which is something that was really a game changer for the Chinese, for the Pakistani, and for the Indian to see how ill-performed are the French jets. So the Pakistani
Elijah,
are extremely happy.
Pause for a second. You'll definitely get to finish your point, but this is a kind of a story within a story, which is important to analysts like yourself, which is why you raise it. So the Pakistan defense minister said that the Pakistani military, used Chinese jets that they purchased from China to down 5 Indian jets, 3 of which they say, Pakistan says, were French Rafales, which are among the most sophisticated, right, most modern air combat tools in the world. And so to analysts like yourself, this is really important. So please continue your point.
Well, India operates 36 Rafale jets in its air force. It has ordered 26 Rafale Marine jet for its navy. So we're talking about a very significant purchase of 7 to 8 billion euros from France to put in service in India. Now, the Chinese have been cooperating with Pakistan over the military industry, the tanks, not only the jets, the missile, and all the range of electronic warfare. So therefore, we see here that there is an importance for China to see the performance of its jets against the French Rafale. So for that, the Pakistani are extremely happy, but all the other observers who support India and China who support Pakistan have seen in combat between the Chinese jet and the French jet. The performance of the Chinese jet is much superior, and that has a huge impact on the selling of the Rafale and the selling of the Chinese jet. This is why the information that has not been denied or confirmed, but at least one confirmation is available, it tells us that indeed the Chinese jet have really overcome and overpowered the Rafale in the air of the Indian Air Force.
Shashank, just briefly, do you think India underestimated Pakistan's capabilities in terms of air combat?
I think it's entirely possible that it may have underestimated the advancement of Chinese air-to-air missiles in ways that would have made some of its planes very vulnerable, particularly when it was intending to fire these missiles from so-called standoff range within Indian airspace. However, all I will note is this crisis took place at a moment where Pakistani air defense systems and the Air Force would have been on exceptionally high alert. And I think we always have to be very, very cautious about drawing any sweeping conclusions about the sophistication of military hardware from any single or small number of engagements. I think we need to see a bit more evidence when the dust has settled to draw those types of conclusions.
Yeah, point well taken. But because I know that this is really the headline for analysts and for people who specialize in defense issues and who look at this conflict closely, I did want to bring it to our viewers' attention. But your point's very well taken. Let's go to the root causes of this conflict. We see this pattern, right, between India and Pakistan, where there is a period of relative calm, and then there is a trigger, and there's an escalation in the fighting. Shashank, again with you, are we going to see this pattern again? Maybe some calm for a few months, for a few years, hopefully, and again fighting for similar reasons? Or do you think anything has changed structurally over the past month?
It has changed for the worse, not for the better. So we will see it again. If you're Pakistani, and I should articulate the Pakistani view as well, the view is that the root cause is the Indian occupation of Kashmir, a province claimed as Pakistan's own, and Indian repression and the denial of self-determination in Kashmir. If you're Indian, of course, you say that the root cause of this conflict is the Pakistan Army's decades-old sponsorship of extreme jihadist organizations like Lashkar-e-Taiba, which by all independent accounts continue to maintain a sizable presence in the heart of Pakistan, which continue to attack civilians periodically year on year. And the Pakistan military, of course, a very powerful force in Pakistan, which is considerably more powerful politically and economically than the elected civilian government, has a underlying imperative to keep that conflict alive, in the Indian view, to sustain itself and its own political economic prerogatives at home. But putting those two explanations aside, what we have just seen, as Walter outlined very well a few minutes ago, is that India has laid down new rules of engagement. But in addition to that, the other thing I would add is, whereas all previous crises have ended with external involvement, just like this one, it is the case, I think, that America's grip over these belligerents on both sides is declining. India is more powerful than it was. Pakistan is less important strategically to the United States than it once was. So I am not so sure that in crises down the road, the United States, or indeed any other government, will be able to bring to bear carrots and sticks to close a conflict, to halt a conflict, in the way that has happened in so many successive crises and wars of the past 50, 60 years.
Walter, in the absence of a political settlement over Kashmir between India and Pakistan, are we almost bound by definition to see another round of fighting at some point down the line?
I think I generally have to agree with Shashank's pessimism. I think a lot has to do with the decisions and calculus made by those in the Pakistani military and intelligence services that do interact with these jihadist terrorist groups. You know, there had been a period of time in which the Pakistani military was putting a lot of pressure on them to sort of restrain their actions and operations. There are rumors that the new army chief, General Magnier, has sort of reduced some of that pressure, and perhaps that is associated with what then has taken place recently. I think, though, we should also recognize that this is not 100% a story of Pakistani state sponsorship, that for reasons that Shashank has outlined, there are Indian Kashmiris who have made decisions to kind of take up the gun and determine that, you know, the only way to bring about meaningful change is by joining some kind of armed action rather than working through a political process. So, you know, we'll certainly expect to see a tactical de-escalation on terms of both sides' regular forces, but the underlying problems aren't going away. And the only other thing I would just add for your viewers to be aware of is that low levels of violence, particularly along the line of controlling Kashmir, are the norm. Which is to say, even in times which we refer to as peacetime or low levels of conflict, the two sides are occasionally shooting at each other, shelling at each other, bombing each other. So, you know, the existence of those, is still kind of associated with times of peace. So we don't expect that violence is going to drop to zero.
So Donald Trump says, quote, on his social media, "I will work with you both to see if a solution," meaning India and Pakistan, "with you both to see if a solution can be arrived at concerning Kashmir." Elijah, do you see, have the last 2-3 weeks given you any reason to believe that there are the seeds of a political resolution here concerning Kashmir, in Trump's words?
Well, any Indian or Pakistani leader proposing compromise risks being labeled either weak or a traitor. Domestically, for both sides, it's important to understand that this is a very complicated issue. This is not something that Donald Trump can resolve from one day to another, or in weeks, or in months, or in even years, because each side is barricaded behind its claim. And I really don't agree that India is very important for the US and Pakistan is not. On the contrary, there were a lot of cooperation between Pakistan and the US, and the influence of China in Pakistan is very important for the US to tackle it and to try to compromise and try to balance it. This is why we see the International Monetary Fund in Pakistan lending money and trying to support projects. And although it is insignificant in comparison to what China is offering to Pakistan, but there is a presence of the West there. There is a collaboration over terrorism. And of course, there is a big problem between the Pakistani and the neighbors, including Iran. We're talking about the Sistan, Baluchistan, etc. So this is not an insignificant area, and the focus is not on India. In Asia, both are very important. And for China, what's happening in India is also important because one of the most important countries in Asia and growing economy, the most populated, and China feel the threat more or less, but also this is why it's relying on Pakistan and supporting it. Therefore, the presence of the Chinese and the presence of the Indian in relation, supporting, linking themselves to the US, to Australia, to Japan is also important for this coalition, and China is looking at it very carefully. Therefore, there is a lot of attention in that area. But is it going to be solved easily? There are also the water problem. There are other problems in between the two countries. The borders is not an issue that easy solved, even between India and China. So it's not going to be solved between India and Pakistan by Donald Trump with a magic wand.
Shashank, the Trump administration offered to hold or help hold talks between India and Pakistan at a later date to find this more permanent solution. Pakistan said, we'd like to do that. And India so far seems, at least publicly, more reticent, saying we haven't agreed to this. What does that tell you?
Well, I think it tells us that some sort of vague undertaking was made to Pakistan that talks would follow in order to induce it to the table to this ceasefire. But of course, India is very reluctant to accede to any process where the two sides will discuss what I think the US described as a broad range of issues. In other words, that is a euphemism for saying we will discuss not just the subjects of concern to India, which is terrorism emanating from Pakistan, but also the political issues that Pakistan long wants to raise, which is the status of Kashmir. For the Indian government, what they call the internationalization of the Kashmir issue, putting it on the world stage, putting it into the UN, putting it into these big discussions, that is completely antithetical to their strategic aims. So, of course, they are very, very reluctant to agree to this. My guess is we will see talks that follow. My colleagues reckon that venues like Abu Dhabi or London may be discussed as possible venues for these discussions. But I think the Indians will be really reluctant to broaden the agenda, and we will have to see if that causes problems in making this ceasefire stick in the days and weeks that follow.
All right, that's the time we have for today. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks to all our guests, Walter Ladwig, Elijah Magnier, and Shashank Joshi. Thank you, too, for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there, @AJ Inside Story. From me, Cyril Vanier, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.